Alright, so far we have gone through the first two chapters in the book, getting started with PHP and the variables chapter. I'm skipping 3 because we're going to go back to that on Tuesday. We also just went through chapter 4 using numbers. The plan is between now and hopefully about 4:30 is to go over chapters 5 and 6. Okay, so at that time then we'll have, after we get through with next week, we'll be through about the first 6 chapters of the book. So I'll work through half the book. Yeah, but as you guess, it gets progressively harder. So after we get to that point, so probably we'll be looking at either next week or the beginning of the following week, and you'll get your first assignment. All right, again, you'll get 2 class periods to work on it, and again, it'll be due 2 weeks after the day that it's assigned. All right, so right now, like I said, I want to go over chapter 5, which is on using strings, and chapter 6, which is on control structures. So if you have your book and you're looking through it, I'm on page 91, using strings. Now, as always, I mentioned this to you before, but I want to say this again. If I go and just basically Google PHP String Functions, I can be pretty much 100% assured that the first thing that comes up, or the second in this case, is from php.net. So if you look up on the screen here, notice, because it's alphabetized, I have never counted those, but my guess is there's somewhere upwards of between 30 and 50 maybe closer to 30, I don't know. But there's quite a few built-in string functions. This chapter in no way means to cover every single one of them, but it covers the ones that you'll use most often. The way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to first go through this and talk about a couple of these that you're going to end up using a lot. So the good news is when you start looking here, and we look up this whole first screen that you see up here, there's only one I want to talk about, and that's add slashes. All right, it says quote string with slashes. It says returns a string with backslashes, etc. The idea is, if I attempted to put this into a database, into a text field, using MySQL, I'd get an error because technically it would be single quote O, single quote Riley, single quote, right? So it wouldn't understand that. But instead of doing that and putting that in there, if I put this in, and when I start working with it, if I say this, something like this, then what it's going to do is it basically sets it up so it looks like this. Remember how you've seen this in other languages? You're putting that escape character in front of it, so it'll allow it to be put in correctly. Now it still will go into the database like this, but we're just talking about getting it ready. So add slashes is one of those functions that you end up using quite a bit. Most of the other stuff, yeah, that's some neat stuff, but it's not a lot that you'll use. Echo we've already looked at, right? So you know what echo is. This one, hopefully we looked at it in JavaScript. I think we did. But it's explode is split a string by a string. You've got explode and you've got implode. All right, when you're exploding, you're typically, what are you doing? You're blowing something up, right? You're making it bigger. When you're imploding, you're bringing it together. So when you're exploding, like if you take a string, you're turning it into an array. And when you implode, you're doing it the other direction. Now, if that confused you, we're going to see examples of it in the coming weeks. All right. Another one, yeah, working with HTML entities and HTML special characters. These two kind of work together. So in other words, the reason that you might use special entities, is you know that about the problems that you can have when you're mixing HTML and PHP and you put in something like this. John or Jim. If I say Jim and Bob went to the store, no biggie. But if I do this and I use that ampersand, it can cause trouble because it thinks that it's a special HTML character. So when I start working and I use the HTML special characters, it allows us to get along with that. Okay. Implode is the opposite of explode. Again, implode takes an array and it makes it into a string. So explode takes a string and turns it into an array. Implode takes an array and makes it a string. So why would you want to use those? All right, because if you've got an array and you want to run a string function on it that doesn't exist, you either write it yourself or you make it a string and then use the function. And then you make it an array again. Same thing going the other way. All right, so you end up using those things quite a bit. When we get into talking about databases, we'll use MD5. I know you guys have talked about Doug talking a lot about security. Did he talk to you about MD5? All right, I know, John, you'd know that. But for instance, if I do this, there's a big difference if I put in if I'm inserting information into a database and I put in, for example, just password. If I put in password, the word password for a password, it goes in as P-A-S-S-W-O-R-D, clear text. If I do this, MD5 password, it goes in as about 30-some characters that are letters and numbers and stuff combined, where it wouldn't make a lot of sense. So when you go in and you're trying to put security into a website, you don't want things to go into clear text. MD5 is one of the built-in functions that you can use. To make it even more confusing, you can use MD5 with PHP, you can do it with MySQL, or you can do it with both. All right? And there's other things that you can use. When we get to that point, we'll talk about things like salts that you can use along with this. But what you're doing basically is you're hashing. All right? Money format, notice, formats a number as a currency string. I showed you number format, but there's a money format also. Here's one that you use a lot. If you all know what a text area is, you know it's a text box on steroids, so it's got words and columns. All right. Well, if you go and you save all that stuff into PHP, it has no way of knowing where the line breaks actually are. It'll try to format it, but it probably won't want it to format it the way you want it to. If you use NL2BR, that means new line to break tag. So for instance, if I write inside of a text box, imagine that I wrote all this stuff in a text box. Hello there. And then I hit enter. My name is Jeff. And I hit enter. How are you? And I hit enter again today. If I put that in there and I put it in like that into a text box and I print it out with PHP, it's going to print out as one line. All right? It's not going to understand what those line breaks are. But if I take this and I put it into a string or whatever, and I surround the whole thing with NL2BR, all right, new line to break. Then what that'll do is that'll take this, all right, all this stuff that we've got here, and it'll take it, and at the end of each line, it'll mandatorily just put in a regular BR tag. So you can tell indeed where the line breaks are. All that makes sense? All right. Again, a lot of times just seeing a simple example can help. All right. Let's see. Printf, and there was an fprintf earlier. Those are right from the C language. They literally ripped them off from C. So if you want to do formatted printing or output a formatted string, you can use printf. And if you're doing it out to a file, fprintf. Rtrim, again, you probably have seen me do examples like this before. If I ask you to enter something into a field and somebody types in Jeff, space, 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 and I run rtrim on that, it removes trailing spaces. If I run ltrim on it and it's got space, space, space at the beginning, ltrim removes, leading spaces. If I got leading spaces and trailing spaces and I run trim on it, it removes both of those. But if I, for example, put in here space, 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 Jeffrey P. Scott. So if it literally looks like that with the 3 or 4 spaces on the end, and if I type in trim, double quote, and put that in there, that'll remove all of these spaces. That's from the L trim, and that'll remove all of those spaces, which is the R trim. It won't remove that space or that one. All right. Just like you can use scanf, there's an scanf in here. We'll get to it at a later time. There's a bunch of string functions. String replace, don't worry about case sensitivity. String repeat, all right, and there's a whole bunch of them that you can see in here. All right, this one, if you've never seen this, then shame on your instructor for not mentioning to you, but there's a string compare and a string case compare. So up here someplace. we've got the string case, but I know there's a regular string compare. If I go and compare two things, all right, so if I've got two strings, if I say S1, I'm sorry, it'd be a $sign S1 equals Jeff, and $S2 equals Scott. All right, and then I'd run the string compare function, and I'd say $S3 equals string compare $S1 $S2 Anybody want to take a wild guess at what that's going to give back? They're not equal, and I think you know that. But would you agree that Jeff is less than Scott? Would you agree with that? Phonetically, J comes before S. So that will be designed to, by default, will return -1 to show that the first is less than the second. If I reverse those, so I had S2 as Jeff and S1 as Scott, now when I'm comparing them, S1 is greater than S2, so that one will return +1. And if they're the same, it'll return 0. That's how string compare works. So if the first string is less than the second string, it'll return, it says any negative number, but it almost always returns -1. If S1 is greater than S2, it'll return any positive number, but it usually is +1. If they're equal, it always returns 0. Again, there's string positioning, string reverse. All right. Is there a string within a string? String tokenizing, uppercase, lowercase, all the usual players that you're used to. I already showed you trim and rtrim, etc. before. All right. So those are the main ones. So why did I do that? Because we've covered most of the ones that are covered in here. Remember that if I want to concatenate two strings together, so if I've got this, let's make this 1 again, and make this 2 again, and make this Scott, and to say equals S1, $S1 dot $S2. A couple things I want to say real quickly if you look up on the screen. First of all, hopefully it makes sense to you that what that's going to return, and we'll put the double quote like Kelly said before around it, that'll return that. Literally it glues them together, and I didn't put any blank spaces in there, okay? What you may or may not know, you don't even need spaces before the dot. That's totally legit to do that. Some people code like that. To me, it's a little messy, so I like to do it like this. I'd rather do it like that, but if you don't agree and you want to do it the other way, it's no biggie. But if I put the blank space either here or here, I'm going to get Jeff Scott. Or if I say dot, single quote, space, single quote, or I could have used double quotes. That'll also work. Any of those will work. That's how you concatenate strings together. That's shown on page 95, and it's demoed in a program on 96 and 97. New lines is the NL2BR tag that I already showed you. The special chars and the entities, etc. I already showed you. All right, there's an add slashes that I showed you. Guess what? There's also a strip slashes that removes them. All right, we'll look at all this stuff more or less when we get to the database stuff. But there are examples in the book on page 101. All right. Encoding and decoding. If you have to do character encoding is shown in here. It's not that big a thing right now. All right. Turning all the way up to 107, they talk about substrings. What's a substring? It's a string within a string, right? So there's a bunch of substring functions that you can use. There, the string compare functions that I showed you, I just showed you strcmp, but the other ones are shown on page 107. Okay. Good, bad, or indifferent, one thing that some people like and some people really hate about PHP rather, is the fact that quite often when you're told to do something, there might be a half dozen ways of doing it. So which one do you choose? You choose the one that you're most comfortable with. If you want to use them all, you can. It's kind of a waste, but you could do that if you wanted to. All right, so again, going back to what we talked about before, we've now gone through Chapter 1, Chapter 2, and Chapters 4 and 5. So before we finish today, I'd like to go through Chapter 6. Talk a little bit about control structures. It's the usual stuff that you've seen in other languages. All right. Then we'll call it a period. Next week we'll go through an example which will be either 1 or 2 class periods. I don't know. Let's pretend it's 2. Then we'll come back and we'll look at all the material that's in Chapter 3. Then you'll get your first assignment, which means all the stuff that's in here is fair game for that. Okay? Then you'll get 2 class periods to work on that. Then we'll come back and we'll go through Chapter 7, which is arrays. And I'll give you probably 2 problems. One program where you'll take a program you already did earlier and you'll modify it to use arrays, and another new one that'll use arrays. All right, you'll get two class periods to work on that, and it'll be a 2-week due date. After that, we'll be about halfway done with the book. All right, when we get to that point, I'm going to change the order a little bit just so you see this. I'm going to go over functions and then directories. So I'm going to do 10 and 11, and you won't get any homework on those. But then we're going to come back and do 8 and 9, all right, and then you're going to get an assignment, all right, because by that time, we'll have gone through forms, and we'll have gone through sessions and cookies and working on web apps. You'll be doing true web apps. Then we'll come in and we'll look at 12 and 13, and you'll have one last assignment. That's the plan. So it looks like around 4 assignments. Each assignment will have 1, 2, or 3 programs for you to do. First assignment, if it has 3 programs, 1 or 2 are going to be fairly simple. All right, I want to get you up to speed on stuff. 1 or 2 will be fairly difficult. Not that they're hard, but they'll be difficult because you don't have a lot of practice in this. That's all. All right, so going back to our book then, and again, we're in Chapter 6. So starting here on page 115, they talk about an if statement and a switch, relational operators and logical operators, and loops. That's what the whole chapter is. All right. Just like you've seen, and Amanda, I don't know if you had to take the JavaScript class or not. You didn't? Okay. All right. So we'll spend a little bit more time on it. We'll go through some examples too. Maybe not today, but we will. So if I want to sit there and check 2 variables, let's use this. All right. So I put in here. Get rid of that stuff. That's from last class. So if I come in here and I say $, num1 equals 10 and $num2 equals 15. So if I'm saying, I said this a little bit before, if I want to compare them for equality, I will say if $num1 triple equals $num2. Well, that's going to return false. Does that make sense to everyone? They're not the same number. All right. If I say if they're not equal to one another, that will return true. If I say if number 1 is greater than number 2, that'll return false. Greater than or equal, that will return false. If I say if num1 is less than, that will return true. If I say less than or equal to, that will return true. Am I right in assuming all that makes sense? You know, all right. And you'll see examples of it in the book, and we'll look at some examples too. All right. So that's basically an if. What you're putting in the parentheses, and the parentheses are mandatory here, but what you put in there is a Boolean condition. So what goes in there is something that has to be resigned to true or false. If it's true, whatever comes after this, you know, whatever stuff you'd put in here, if it's true, you do it. If it's not, you don't. You can also put an else in here. And if I put an else in here, whoops, again, along with some stuff, in this case, the program is automatically going to do whatever is in here because 10 is less than 15. If I check to say whether it's greater than or equal, it's not. 10 is not greater than or equal to 15, so it'll do whatever is in here. All right. I can also, if I've got a bunch of different things, so let's write, I'm going to write a real simple program. I'm not going to run it for you, but you'll have to take my word for it, it would work. All right, so I'm going to write a simple PHP program right now. And what I want to do is I'm going to put in a simple number. $, I'll put in 3 numbers. $num1, and I'm just going to set it equal to 0. All right. $num2, and I'm going to set that equal to 37. I'm just pulling values out of the air. $num3, and I'm going to set that equal to 366. All right. So what I want to do is I want to figure out whether the number is odd, even, or 0. You with me? I want to know if the number is odd, even, or 0. Now I could write a separate function and pass each number to it, but I'm going to make it a little longer. I'm going to check each function or each number one at a time. Okay? So I'm going to say if num1 modulo 2, which means divide it by 2 and check the remainder. If that's 0, all right, I'm going to echo $num1 is even. Okay? And that's what it's going to do in that first case. Do you agree with me? 300, let's do 3 first. All right? So if it's num3, it is even because it goes in there evenly, so it'll say 366 is even. In that case, that's what it'll say. If we run it on this one, it'll say that it's odd because 37 divided by 2 gives you a remainder of 1. All right? Well, what about 0? The problem is if I do this right now like this, 0 divided by 0 gives you what? 0. So it's going to say 0 is even. I don't want that. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to change this to say, oh, I want to put a check in here first that says if $num1 is equal to 0, then all I'm going to do is I'm going to echo the number is 0. Okay? And in this case, that's what it's going to echo out because it's 0. But I don't have to make any other checks. All right? Now I want to say else if. Here's a quirky thing about this language I may or may not have told you about before. JavaScript doesn't care when you have an else if you make it one word or 2 words. It'll take either one. It won't change it. Like Visual Studio, in VB, if you type else if as one word, it'll break it into 2 for you. This won't. It'll take it either way. And it'll be color-coded either way. All right? So if I say this, else if num1 modulo 2, then I'm going to say the number is even. All right, let me make this a bit smaller. Right, that's what I'm going to do. All right, so we've got that, and we're going to say in here, else echo the number is odd. Does that at least conceptually, does that make sense to you, what we're doing here? Okay. Okay, so if we do that, what we're going to get to later when we go over the function chapter is we're going to do the same thing 3 times. So I could put the same exact code in there and then change that to num2 and that to num2, etc. I could do that. Or I could write what's called a function where I write a routine and then just pass it in this, or pass it in this, or pass it in this. So it'd be less code. But the way that this is written right now, all right, so now if I put in this, and I change all these, so it's the same exact code we had before, but now I'm going to check num2, and num2, and num2. And then if I get down to the bottom here, and I put it in again, all right, one last time, and I guess I shouldn't have tabbed. Now if I change these all to num3, and num3, now this big long mess that's here, this is going to end up printing out at the end. Remember, I got 0, 37, and 366. So this is going to end up, based on that input that you see right there, if I run the program using those inputs, it's going to print out the number is 0, and the second time it'll print out the number is odd, and the third time it'll print out the number is even. Okay? So that's how you can do real simple if statements. Okay, and I'll tell you what, I'll take the whole program. And we can move it over later. I'm not worried about it, but I'll take it, I'll even save it out there on the system. All right. So that helps, good, and that's what it's meant to do. So. I'll take that and I'll just save that over here. All right, after class, so I'll save that. Then if I write another one, if I did something like this, let's say that in here that we're going to write another program. And again, it'll be fairly small. I'll try to keep it short. And you'll say something in here like Bill equals XL, Bob equals L, Mary equals medium, that's what these are supposed to be, and Mark equals small. All right, you with me? Person's a small, a large, etc., that kind of thing. Now, I could check in here, and I literally could check and say if, so it'll be $Bill, $Bob, $Mary, and $Mark. Yes. P, H, P. All right, so that's Bill, etc. All right, or I might say, you know what, that doesn't really look good. Those aren't really good names. So I probably would come in and say something like, maybe I just call it what it was. X large equals XL. All right. Large equals L. Medium equals M, etc. And small equals that. Well, this may not mean anything to you, but I'm going to actually change this so it looks the same. X large, medium, and small. All right, now I can create a bunch of people that are in here. I can say $Bob equals $X large, etc. Just imagine I did a bunch of them. So I can come in there and say this. I can come in and say if $Bob, like we just did, equals $X large, and I can keep doing that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you've only got a few variables in here like this and they only have a few possibilities, I can come in there and do this. I can say $size, which is what I want to do. I'll just set it equal to nothing. And then I can do what's called create a switch statement. So I can type in switch on $size. So I'm going to imagine someplace in here, there's some code in here, that's going to set size to either this or this or this or this type of thing. So I can do the ifs like we did before, or I can do this case. And I can type in case X large like that. Or I can even use this if I want to. So there's two ways that you can write the same kind of code is what I'm telling you. We're going to go over some examples in the book. We are, because they're in the book. Yes. They don't have to be numbers like they do in other languages we've looked at. You can use strings. You can use strings, you can use numbers here, you can use characters here. You can use a lot of different things in the switch statement. All right. So it's just another way of writing the same thing. That was not a good example, but just so you hear that at least. The other thing is that's in here, that's in the chapter. Again, if you say you haven't had much experience in that, that's fine. All right, you'll still, believe it or not, you'll be okay. In the book on page 129, they show the PHP operators. There's a big chart that goes through all of them. All right. And the other thing that's in the chapter is they talk about how you can do loops. So there's a whole thing on this switch that I just showed you, and a pretty good example on page 143. All right, we can go over that too if you guys want to. But not this second, but we can. So let's say that I want to write one more program in here. All right. And it's real simple. I want to just do this. I literally want to show the numbers from 1 to 10. So I want to say number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, all the way through 10. In fact, let's make it even bigger. I want to do it from 1 through 100. All right. Jeez. There. Now put the question mark in. Okay, I can come in here and do something like this. 4. $X equals 1. $X less than or equal to 100. Plus plus $X. What's that? Yeah, you can do either one. Either one would work. So if I do this and then I say echo number $X. That's literally going to print on the screen number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, all the way through 100. You all know that. All right, so that's one way. That'll literally print out. The output of this will be number 1, number 2, number 3, all the way up until it gets to number 100. Okay, so that's one way I can do it. So what I'm saying is create a variable that's called $X, have it start at 1, and go all the way to 100, and every time you've done this, then add 1 to it. So the first time it's going to print this, then this, then this. When it prints out number 100, this $X will now be 101, so it won't be less than or equal to 100, so it'll fall out of here. Okay? All right. Just give me a second and I'll take your question. All right. There's two other ways that I can do that here. I can say $X equals 1 outside of any loop, and then say while it's less than or equal to 100, print it, and when you're done printing it, then add 1 to it. So those two things will do the exact same thing. They will all print all this stuff. All right? It looks a little funky as far as the numbers and the syntax goes. If I don't want to do that, I can also come through there and do this. I can say the word do. So do all that stuff while. So and I'll save this one also. So there's 3 ways of printing all that stuff out. All right. What was your question or comment? You can use a for loop to populate a table, to populate an array. You can actually use a for loop if you know what you're doing and you've got like values to populate a form if you want to. All right. So if I did all this, so there's my PHP and there's my ending PHP, that's going to literally, again, the output is going to be this. And I'll save both those, this new 2 and this new 3, and I'll put them in that same folder where all the other stuff is. All right. And again, that's it for that chapter. Told you it'd be around 4:30 or so. All right. Now we'll still go through some of the examples that are in the book, but this is just meant to be to get people started thinking about it and thinking about how this language is different than the other language or other languages that you've learned. So I'll grab this. This was the first one. So this was the if-else, and I'll take that and save that out to the P drive. If else.php. So that one's now out there. This one was loops. So I'll save that one to loops.php. All right, so that'll at least get you started. All right. Oh, I think the other day I was telling you about this, and somebody had asked, it probably was Zane, and I know he's not here right now, but let's see. Darn it, no, I just had it. Now, where did I put that? Okay, forget it. I've got it in here someplace, but I was going to show you because, like I said, I think it was Zane, but regardless, somebody asked, they said, what'd you do in class? And we took this really ugly splotch and turned it into a website. All right. And it's something you guys could look at and probably do in 10, 15 minutes at the most. But those people, I had them rolling their eyes and I think wondering whether or not they were in the right program. The funny thing, too, is not in that class, but now there's no one on the wait list. Yeah, for the 157 class. And there's 4 who are in the class with Patricia, the JavaScript class. It'll be on Fridays. And there was actually 1 who must have dropped from this class because there was an opening. All right, so that's all I had. Like I said, we will